So what I've learned after playing this quote-unquote glue-eating hero deck is that while it seems very easy to play on paper, just click the yellow button and a big guy comes out, there's actually a lot more things that you need to think about when you play this deck in practice. So today I'll be sharing what I learned about heroes after playing this deck for a while in ranked, so that you don't have to play this deck yourself to learn about all these things. If you'd like me to make similar videos for more meta decks, please tell me in the comments and, like the video and stuff. If enough people are interested, I will probably make this into a series or something. Anyway, let's get into the deck. So I have a confession to make. In the last ban list reaction, not too long ago, I quite underestimated how big the limits actually affect this deck, because if you are unaware, they limited Stratos and Liquid Soldier both to limit 3. And effectively that means that we went from 9 copies of each to only 6 copies. Because, you have the free Stratos, the free Liquid Soldier, and the free Emergency Call that you previously could play, but now it's gone down to 6 copies. Well, that doesn't sound that big of a deal in paper, because, you're playing a 30 card deck anyway, so, you can just play a smaller deck, and chances of you opening with them aren't actually that different from before. But, well, there's a big key difference with how the deck is played after the ban list is that because you only get one Liquid Soldier, basically, it's the grind game of this deck is abysmally worse after the first turn, and because you basically only get to use Liquid Soldier once, and I guess a second time when in the graveyard, but that will require you to use the Miracle Fusion on a second turn. So, basically, this deck is a very aggressive deck, which you could probably already tell by just playing against this deck even once. This deck, I would say, has, in my mind, 5 main pushes. In a perfect hand, there are 5 ways that this deck can push for damage. The first is the free Arm Dragon level 10, which is just a free guy that pretty much needs immediate attention, because once this guy hits the field and activates its effect, you just blow up everything, which is insanely good. The second is just Stratos, which gets you into a Liquid Soldier, and then with the free poly in your hand from your skill, you get free Sunrise, and then the Sunrise grabs you a Miracle Fusion, which grabs you another Sunrise, and then you can just attack with the 2 Sunrises and pop a card when you attack with them, and also draw 2 from Liquid Soldier, which is really strong. That's the second main push. The third main push is a Super Poly, which you can automatically get to your hand from your skill, and that gets rid of a monster for free and gives you a monster for free. And that is really difficult for decks to play around, which is something that I don't really like about this deck in general, but that's another topic entirely, and we won't go over how much I hate this deck. It is very hard to play around for your opponent, so they will pretty much need to accept that one of their monsters is just going to be gone, and there's not a lot that they can do about it. They can force it out early, but they can't completely stop the Super Poly from activating. The fourth is Neos Fusion, which is just a free fusion when you open with the Neos Fusion. You pretty much bring out either Brave Neos using Crosskeeper, which gives you two more free draws, which is insane. Or you use your Rainbow Dragon in your deck to make a Rainbow Neos, which is game winning. It just wins the game on its own if your opponent doesn't have any way to stop it. And the fifth way is if you hard draw Miracle Fusion, you can still activate the Miracle Fusion if your Stratos get stopped, for example. You can still activate the Miracle Fusion and make a Sunrise that way. And even though that's a lot less good than just using the normal poly on a Stratos and a Liquid Soldier, it is still a way that you can push for damage. So, yep, these are the main 5 ways that the deck can push for damage, which is actually a lot. It's insane that a deck like this can have 5 ways to push for damage, but after the ban list, they pretty much lose all of their grind game if those 5 pushes don't work initially. And realistically, in a normal hand, you don't get all 5 pushes, right? You don't even if you can choose your starting hand, I don't think you'll be able to have, all 5 pushes, because, you need a discard for the skill, and then the Arm Dragon level 10 needs a discard, you need your normal summon for Stratos, and then you need to draw the Neos Fusion, Nurko Fusion. It's pretty much impossible to get, all 5 pushes in a single turn. But after your first turn, after you try to push with, your Arm Dragon level 10s, your Stratoses, your Super Polys, and maybe a Neos Fusion if you draw it, the deck really falls behind in the grind game because you run out of your Stratoses. And Stratos is so good in the grind game that having only one Liquid Soldier and 2 Stratos really hurts the deck. Pretty much after your initial push, all your deck has left over is like a free Arm Dragon level 10 every turn. And, any disruption, a Book of Ruin, a quick effect pop, anything can stop this card pretty easily. So if this gets stopped, you're pretty much out of gas. And you could theoretically just be incredibly lucky and top deck another Neos Fusion, but first of all, you can't use Neos Fusion infinitely. You only have two Neos in your deck. You don't want to play a third copy because it's a brick. And when you run out of Neos, you can't even use your Neos Fusion. And sometimes you just draw your Neos, so you can't even use your Neos from your deck. And second of all, you have to draw the Neos Fusion, which is not something that you get to do every single time, especially when your Stratos gets negated and you don't get to search your Liquid Soldier, which you only have 1 copy after the ban list. It's a lot harder to get to Neos Fusion when you can't access the double draw from the Liquid Soldier or from Crosskeeper. So yeah, the deck really suffers a lot after the new ban list from not only consistency issues but also grind game issues. And don't forget that you can play a smaller deck like I do. I play a 24 card deck, which helps you draw into Stratos a lot more frequently than if you play 30 cards. But that also means that you draw like the 6 bricks in your deck a lot more frequently. You have to Thunder level 10, Rainbow Dragon, Arm Dragon, Super Poly, and the 2 Neos. I mean, none of them are really like hard garnets, but those are cards that effectively do nothing in your hand because you get to search them anyway. And if you have like 1 or 2 of these bricks in your hand, it really lowers what your deck is able to do when you go second, and it really hinders the ability for this deck to actually push for game. Like the 5 pushes that I talked about, if you open with these dead cards in your hand, you get a lot less pushes than like what this deck can theoretically do. So yeah, now that I explained how, this deck isn't as strong as what I initially thought after the ban list, let's talk about like some of my deck building decisions for a post-ban list that I have right in front of me. So first, let's talk about the extra deck real quick. It's pretty much exactly the same as before the ban list. You could play 1 less copy of Sunrise theoretically because, we don't have as many copies of Stratos and Liquid Soldier, but you can still make all 3 copies pretty easily, especially when you play against a mirror match. You can just use a Super Poly and use your opponent's heroes to make a Sunrise for yourself, which is really strong. And even if you don't play against heroes, you can use the Stratos and the Liquid Soldier for your first Sunrise, and then once you get your first Sunrise out, you can use your second and third Sunrise by using the first Sunrise in the graveyard as part of the material for Miracle Fusion. So you don't really actually run out of materials to make them, so I don't think that is really an issue. So let's talk about the main deck. Obviously we're playing the Rainbow Dragon, Thunder level 10, Normal level 10, that's like standard. Super Poly is not negotiable, this card is insane. We're playing 2 Neos. This is also a pretty standard thing to do. You don't want to play 3 copies, as I said, it's a break, you don't really want to draw it. And We're playing 2 Stratos and 1 Liquid Soldier, which is the maximum copies of both of them you can play in a single deck. You definitely want 2 Stratos and 1 Liquid Soldier, because Stratos is just so strong. You can use it to not only search your Liquid Soldier, which you will do when you go first, and a lot of times if you go second, you can use it to pop back row. You can use your skill to grab a free Neos, and then just normal summon the Stratos and use the back row pop effect instead. And the back row pop does not target, so it pretty much forces your opponent to make a decision. Either they activate their back row, and you know, if they have multiple back row, they can activate the back row that they can activate, and then you'll be able to pop the other set back row anyway, or they just not activate anything and hope that you don't destroy the most important back row that they have set. Either way, this card is really strong, so you definitely want to play 2 copies and 1 copy of Liquid Soldier for you to search. We're playing 3 Crosskeeper. This card is pretty much the replacement of Liquid Soldier. Even before the ban list, I play 3 copies of Crosskeeper. This card is so good. It not only gives you free draws, which is already insane, it also just has a random effect from hand that gets you a hero monster for free from the graveyard. And even though the effect is negated, just the fact that it gets you a free hero monster is really good, because that means your Stratos get 1 more back row pop. So if your opponent is playing something like a Salamangreat, they pretty much have free set back row every single time, and you can just use Stratos to pop at least 2 of them when you get a free Neos from the skill, and then get a second hero using the effect of Crosskeeper to bring a free hero out. You can access this card with Neos Fusion as well, even if you don't draw it, and that is why some people don't play 3 copies, but I think that playing 3 copies is still optimal, especially after the ban list, because of the value it gets you. It's like more consistent access to draws, which is really good. We're playing 2 White Princess, which is a really strong tech in a meta where like 2/3 of people in ranked are playing exactly heroes. This card pretty much ends their turn, and you don't have to be afraid about any sort of back row removal. You know, some people are playing Night Beam to snipe the Hallow the Life barrier, because Night Beam prevents you from activating the set card in response. But if you have the White Princess, you just don't worry about that at all. You just have this in your hand, and you just turn off the toggle, let your opponent think that they are in a good position, they spam out all of their monsters, they try to go for game, and because usually people either play Hallow the Life barrier or Kite Droid, so on an empty board, like most hero players spam out as many monsters as they can because they want to play around Kite Droid. But instead, you just drop the White Princess and you don't die anyway. And because they committed so much to put monsters on the field, you just make a Armed Dragon level 10 next turn and just blow up everything. And that's how you come out ahead in mirror matches. And even though it's not good against decks like Salamangreat, it's still good against other decks that have monsters with levels or ranks, which is like most of them. The 2 Neos, free emergency call. Like before the ban list, you could play fewer copies than 3, but after the ban list, you pretty much always need 3 copies for the consistency. It's probably not negotiable because of how strong Stratos is. We're playing 2 Miracle Fusion because it's really searchable, and also if you draw it, it's not bad because it gives you another way to make a sunrise if you get interrupted. The free Neos Fusion is pretty much mandatory, it's so good. And Hallow the Life barrier as insurance that we don't lose to an opposing hero deck. And as you can see, we're not actually playing any sort of back row that disrupts our opponent. We are not playing Book of Moons, we're not playing any limit-free, well, obviously we can't play any limit-free spells and traps because of the new ban list, but we're not playing any sort of like warning points or even MSTs, Cosmics, Night Beams, all that sort of stuff. We're not playing any traditional back row because this build is tailored towards a hero meta. And the way to win in a hero meta is to play as many stall cards as you can. And even if you're not playing against hero, the stall cards are also incredibly useful just to outgrind your opponent because the skill is just insane. The skill is exactly untouched after the new ban list, so you just still get to print out a free Armed Dragon to level 10 every single turn, and a lot of decks just can't really deal with a free level 10 every single turn. So you can just stall, and every turn you just make another level 10, and just repeatedly do that until your opponent eventually runs out of resources and they just die to a single big guy, which is, you know, what you're hoping for. Extra deck, it's pretty much the same, so I won't go over it. So yeah, okay, so let's talk about how to win in the mirror match, because you're definitely gonna face against a lot of heroes in ranked, and it's good to have an idea on how to beat another hero deck. And that is where I think a bit of skill expression comes in, because even though this deck looks easy on paper, what you do in the mirror match massively affects how which player wins, and also like the deck building process also comes into play as well. And if you play your cards right, it doesn't matter if you go second or go first, you can win. And here are some like tips that I have collected with me playing this deck in ranked and facing numerous hero players. So first of all, the biggest rule of thumb is save the Super Poly. Save it for as long as possible, as humanly long as possible, because this card, this one single spell card, is like the one card that can completely change how the game is going. You can be in an extremely losing position, and then you just slam the Super Poly, and suddenly you're winning, because you trade 2 of your opponent's monsters for 1 of your own monster. And that's insane. That can win you the game on the spot. So you want to save this for as long as possible, so that they use their Super Poly before you use your Super Poly. A pretty accurate rule of thumb that I've discovered that you do when you face against another hero deck is that whoever uses the Super Poly first usually loses the game, because Super Poly is just so strong. Whoever gets the Super Poly last usually wins the game. So your aim is to bait out your opponent's Super Poly while holding your Super Poly for as long as you can. And the second thing is to commit as little as you can, because against a hero deck, what you want to do is to stall. You want to stall for as long as possible, so that they are forced to use their Super Poly, and then afterwards you can use your Super Poly and close out the game. So if you face against a hero player, you don't want to spam out all of your resources to try to like kill them in one turn. Usually it doesn't work, because they will have their own stall cards as well. And even if they don't have any stall cards, that just forces them to use their Super Poly. And if you commit too much to your field, their Super Poly gains insane value. And some people play the hero, this guy, Elemental Hero Core, that uses 3 Elemental Hero monsters, and this card is specifically made to counter the mirror match. And some people play it. We don't play it, because I don't think this is very good. Usually you just make it into Sunrise if you face against another hero player. But if you commit too much, they can just use a Super Poly, get rid of 3 of your monsters, and just make this guy for free. And you don't want them to do that. So what you want to do instead is to just keep threatening lethal with a Armed Dragon level 10. So just keep making this guy try to blow up everything they have, try to attack, and force them to use any of their back rows or their Super Poly. And once you have them out of the way, you can use your own Super Poly and close out the game after they try to attack with their monsters. So how a game would usually go is, well, you try to break their board with as minimal effort as possible. Maybe you make a Armed Dragon level 10 and 1 Sunrise. You grab the Miracle Fusion with the Sunrise, and you keep the Miracle Fusion in your hand. You don't use it immediately, because the Miracle Fusion in your hand gives you follow-up, and it gives you a consistent way to just keep making Sunrises, which is a consistent form of damage output that you can And yeah, you can apply pressure to your opponent and force them to use their Super Poly. So maybe you have like an Arm Dragon level 10 and Sunrise on your field, and you try to attack, and then maybe that forces their Hallowed Life Barrier or Kite Rod or whatever. And then during their turn, maybe they use their Super Poly to get rid of your Arm Dragon and your Sunrise to make their own Great Tornado, this guy. And then they maybe try to summon some monsters. And then you activate your Hallowed Life Barrier so that you don't die after they use their Super Poly, because this is the most effective way for you to not die after they use their Super Poly. And after you survive their Super Poly push, during your turn you can use your Super Poly, or you can still save it in your hand if you could, if you can save it for as long as you can, you don't want to use it. And then during your turn, you can just make another Sunrise because you kept the Miracle Fusion in your hand last turn. You make another Sunrise, and then you grab a second Miracle Fusion. You can use it, or again, you can keep it in your hand. And then you again destroy their stuff with the Arm Dragon level 10, and then threaten game again, and then you basically trade these sort of stall cards until one of you runs out of stall cards. So that's why having more stall cards is so good, because that means you always have the upper hand when you are trading damage with your opponent in a mirror match. And that means that you always come out on top, because when they try to push for game, you can block the push, and then when you try to push for game, they might not have as many defensive options as you do, and that will win you the game. And another thing to keep in mind when you play against a mirror match is, if you go first, you pretty much always make Arm Dragon Thunder level 10, right? You just always make this card regardless of what deck you're playing against. Usually it's a good idea to set the Arm Dragon Thunder level 10, because against other things like, Arm Dragon level 10, the normal one, only destroys face-up monsters. Super Poly, you can only fusion summon with face-up monsters of your opponent. You can use your own face-down monsters, but you can only use face-up monsters that your opponent controls. So just having it face-down is good. And also having it face-down makes it still have the effect that it cannot be destroyed by battle, because when it's face-down, it still is treated as being summoned by Arm Dragon level a Arm Dragon monster because of the skill. So you can just have this card set face down, and if your opponent tries to beat over it, they can't, because it just cannot be destroyed by battle. But if you have it face up, and then your opponent flips it face down with something like a Book of Moon, then it can be destroyed by a battle because it forgets that it's being summoned by an Arm Dragon monster. So that's a key difference, and why you usually want to set this face down. But if you face against another hero player, you want this face up. You want a face up Arm Dragon Thunder level 10, because this forces them to commit. This forces them to commit to a Arm Dragon level 10 themselves, because if they just do their plays, usually you can just pop whatever they summon. So that pretty much forces them to make a regular Armed Dragon level 10 as the first thing they do. And then when they flip it face up, you can just pop it with your Armed Dragon Thunder level 10, and then they can start, doing the Stratos into Liquid Soldier, into Sunrise, or they might be baited into using a Super Poly to try to get rid of your Armed Dragon Thunder level 10, which is good, because you can just stall for game with a White Princess or a Hallowed Life Barrier, and now you're not dead, and they don't have a Super Poly, and you still have your Super Poly, and that's insane. And a third trick that you can do is with Crosskeeper, because of how you want to keep your Super Poly in your hand for as long as possible. Crosskeeper actually gets a lot of value, because you obviously don't want to set your Super Poly if you're not using it, because if you set it, your opponent can just pop it, and you now don't have a Super Poly. So you want to keep this in your hand, right? The thing about Crosskeeper is that after you draw with Crosskeeper, you place a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck. And if you play Super Poly, you can grab it back next turn for free, absolutely free. You just get it for free next turn, because the skill says you can add a Super Poly from your deck and a Poly from outside your deck to your hand. It doesn't say that you can only add Super Poly once per duel. You can add Super Poly an infinite amount of times, as long as you have Super Polys in your deck. So what that means is you can grab a Super Poly turn 1, that's cool, and then you can Crosskeeper, shuffle back the Super Poly from your hand back to your deck, and then next turn, when you activate your skill again, you add back the Super Poly that you shuffled back to your hand. And basically you pretty much negate the disadvantage, like the cost of using Crosskeeper. So you basically just draw 2 cards for free. And that's insane. That's like a really cool trick that you can do. And you also, because your opponent doesn't know what card you shuffle back to your deck, right? So they have the impression that your set card might be a Super Poly, so they might try to like play around it or try to pop it. But in reality, it could be a Hallowed Life Barrier, which you can chain into your opponent's back row removal. It could be a Miracle Fusion to bait your opponent into thinking that it actually does something. It could be like an E-Emergency call, it could be anything. And in reality, your Super Poly is in your deck, which you can grab back next turn. So that's like a very smart play that you can do. So that's what differentiates the good hero players and the bad hero players, is how like you utilize the tools in your deck. Right. Like the deck has so many pushes that sequencing them in the correct order is a very important thing to do when you play this deck. It's not like I just spam Dragon level 10 every single time and hope it wins. Like that won't get you very far. It probably could win you some games, but like if you want to actually like come out on top in mirror matches or against other good players or good decks, you will need to learn about some of these like mirror match interactions that I talked about, or some of like the sequencing of how you use your different pushes. Maybe you don't want to make an Dragon level 10 as like the first thing you do. Maybe you want to do that after you already bait out all of the interruptions with like a Stratos or a Super Poly, and then after you bait out all the interruptions, and then you use your skill to grab the Dragon level 10 and just blow up everything without being stopped. So yeah. Another thing you can do with Stratos is a cool little trick that lets it pop more back row than it originally intends to. So if you have, if your opponent has like more than one back row, maybe they have like 2 or 3 back row, which is pretty common against decks like Salamangreat, right? They oftentimes have a lot of back row. You want to pop multiple back row. What you can do is you just need Stratos and anything in your hand. It's like pretty easy to achieve. You use your skill, you set the Neos instead of Dragon, you flip up the Neos, and then you normal summon the Stratos, and then you choose the effect to pop back row. That usually, normally it pops 1 back row because you have the Neos next to it, so you have 1 other hero monster, so that pops 1 back row. But what you can do next is chain the Super Poly by using the Stratos on your field and any monster your opponent controls. And what that will do is not only do you get rid of one of your opponent's monsters, which is really strong, and they can't respond to it, you also actually now get to pop 2 back row, because even though the Stratos is not on the field, it doesn't count itself, right? It counts monsters except discard. So even if Stratos is not on the field, after you Super Poly into making a fusion monster, you now have both that fusion monster and the original Neos that is next to it. So you get to pop 2 back row, and you get to pop them without targeting, which is really, really strong. Even if your opponent tries to activate, say, a Droplet to like maybe try to negate your Stratos, you can still chain the Super Poly and then pop something else. You can chain the Super Poly, make the fusion monster, and then if your opponent has 2 more back row aside from the Droplet, you can just pop the 2 other cards instead. And you not only get rid of 1 monster, you pop 2 back row with only 1 Stratos. That's insane. That's very, very strong. And that is game winning. And after that, you still have the Poly in your hand, the regular Poly, because of your skill, right? So after you get rid of all your opponent's back row and one of their monsters, you just get to activate your normal Poly, fusion summon using the Neos and the fusion monster on your field, or if you have a Liquid Soldier in your hand, you can use that instead. And then just get to make a Sunrise and another Sunrise using the Miracle Fusion, and that's a lot of monsters. That's like game winning. So that is something that you could do. And another thing that is really dumb with the skill is Neos Fusion doesn't lock you from using the skill, because the skill technically doesn't special summon a monster, it just like plays a monster face down. So even after you use the Neos Fusion, you can use your skill to summon a monster for free. So if you only open with Neos Fusion and nothing else, you can use the Neos Fusion to make a monster, make like a Brave Neos, for example, and then you send the Crosskeeper as a material, and then you draw 2, right? And then you draw 2. Maybe you find like a Liquid Soldier. Maybe you find one of these bricks in your hand. But now you have a card for you to send with your skill. So now you can use your skill, send whatever you draw, or you can even send the fusion monster that you made. You can send the free Braviers if you want to. You can send it, and then still get the free Armed Dragon Thunder level 10, for example. You can still grab it for free. And then you can have it on your field for turn 1, or you can make a Armed Dragon level 10 to try to blow up your opponents for turn 2. And yeah, that is something that you can do. The skill doesn't really conflict with Neos Fusion the way that you might think it would. Because skills are stupid. Skills are just really stupid. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it that I want to talk about this deck. It's a lot. Actually, it might be a bit much. A bit more than you would expect me to talk about a deck that has the nickname of being a glue-eating deck. There's actually a bit of just like actually quite a bit of things that you could think about when you play this deck. Not only do you have a lot of deck building freedom, because you can either go like a stalling route like I have. You can play White Princess and have Life Barrier to try to stall and play fewer cards that actually stop your opponent. Or you can play, Book of Moon, Warning Point, Effective Veiler, DD Crow, those types of things to actually try to stop your opponent. You can try to play a smaller deck, like I have, or you can try to play a bigger deck, which I don't recommend because after the balance, this deck is just not very consistent if you play 30 cards. But yeah, hopefully you learned something if you are trying to play heroes. I won't stop you. I mean, this deck is a bit more fun than I originally thought it would after playing this deck for a while. I still don't like this deck, by the way. I still really hate that you can just search Super Bully for free, but I hate this deck less. Just actually things that you can do with this deck that is interesting, that I found out. So, yep, that's it. Again, if you like what I'm doing, if you want to maybe have suggestions on what I could add in videos like these in the future, or if you wanted me to do other decks, just leave a comment, tell me. I read all of my comments. It's not, I mean, I don't have a lot of comments anyway, so yep. So that's it. Okay, bye. Bye.